Well, good evening, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I'm happy about it.
Yeah. It is the first component of Pathways since 2021 has begun. A lot of people were kind of celebrating this last week, and I asked a couple of people, are you celebrating the beginning of a new year, or are you celebrating the end of the old year?
My guess is the end of
the old year. End of the old year definitely had it. Yeah, definitely had it. And we've started out this new year asking the question, what's going to be new? And it is a lot of the same old stuff that we're dealing with this week that we were dealing with last week, and the week before, and the week before, and the week before that.
Yeah, I think the names have changed, but
the names, like the numbers kind of fluctuate a little bit, but it just seems the same old conversation. One thing that is definitely common, that is in the new year that we carried over from the old year, is a topic that we're going to be talking about tonight. One thing that is common that everybody, at least that I've run into, is the issue of stress. And so that's what we're going to be addressing tonight. We're going to be talking about stress. And a very appropriate topic. A lot of stressed out people in this world right now.
I met most of them on the road coming here.
Oh, really? Yeah. Everywhere you go. I mean, it's you can hear it on the newscast. You can hear it in conversations in the grocery store. It just conversations with people on the phone. A lot of people feeling stress, and I think it has incrementally gone up as time has gone on in this last year. I mean, people. We always deal with stress. I mean, all of us have stressful times in our life, but it just seems like this last year has been unusually stressful.
It has.
For a lot of people.
It has, and a lot of it is due to COVID.
Yeah.
And restrictions that are placed on people to interact with each other.
Right.
Because that's really what the joy of life is, right? Is
Yeah.
to have great relationships and friendships.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you travel around the world. And if you're down south, people deal with stress, but they're friendlier. Mm-hmm. Up here, we express our stress a little bit.
Or at least feel free to express it.
Feel free to,
yeah. So I kind of get the sense that there's a lot of people that have reached their stress tolerance level, and everybody does have a different tolerance level, And what we want to do for the next week is to not necessarily increase a person's tolerance of stress, but help people to understand how to respond to it and manage it just a little bit better. This is one of those topics, like a lot of topics in life. I don't think that I ever had in all the classes that I've sat through and seminars and conferences, and I don't think I ever had a class on stress management. I don't think anybody ever sat me down and said, let's talk about the stress in your life and what you can do to respond to it and manage it a little bit better. And that's kind of weird when you kind of think of it, because this is something that's common to everybody, and nobody teaches on it. I learned a lot of stupid stuff in school. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm never going to use this.
I'm never going to use it. I remember, I originally started out in electrical engineering, and I had a couple years of computer programming. Mm-hmm. And in those days, the computers were as big as this room.
Right.
And what you had to do to run a computer program is you had to key punch these cards. And then you'd get a stack of cards, about 10,000 of them. About like that. And you had to feed them into this thing, and it would run some kind of a simple program or something. Useful knowledge.
I have never been able to cash in my Macbeth at the grocery store for food.
Yeah, exactly.
And the math they told us? Don't bring your calculator in.
Yeah. Yeah, who doesn't use that?
The calculator. refrigerator.
Yeah.
It's in the phone.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember learning how to use the slide rule in all my math classes in engineering, and nobody's ever asked me to use it in the church.
It's funny because that's true. Teaching about how to handle stress and teaching people how to balance a checkbook.
Yeah.
Some of the most important things really have fallen to the side.
Yeah. Yeah, all the important things in life we miss out on.
Yeah.
Nobody ever taught me how to be a good husband. Nobody ever taught me how to be a good father.
Right.
And what's more important in this life.
Right.
And it's kind of crazy that you can go through all this schooling and never deal with the substance of life. So at any rate,
That's stressing me out.
Yeah, stressing just talking about it. Yeah. So we're going to be talking about stress for the next few weeks, and just some basic truths about stress. Not all stress is bad. In some ways, stress on our life can have very positive impact. A little bit of pressure, a little bit of goal setting, and am I going to be able to make the grade? Am I going to be strong enough or fast enough, or a little bit of stress in your life can be a very good thing. It'll motivate you. Yeah, it's a good, strong motivator. But too much stress has the exact opposite. Well, a little bit of stress can help you move forward. Too much stress, in reality, I think too much stress is always bad.
Right.
There's nothing that's good that comes from being under too much stress. There's all kinds of very bad things that happen, inside of us. Physiologically, it
heart
messes you up.
attacks.
Yeah.
Weight gain. I've had stress.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. My wife was talking about the COVID-19. I said, "Well, you got to bump that number up a little bit for me."
Yeah, but it's too much stress is the effects on your body.
Yeah.
And anxiety, depression.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah.
Is it something that is addictive?
Well, I think that it certainly feeds into addiction, because anytime we're dealing with any kind of an emotion that we just don't know how to respond to, we're going to look for relief somehow, and so that's going to most times
lead to something
that's probably not all that healthy for us.
Yeah, I see stress and anger. Not exactly the same, but not exactly different.
Yeah, they're second cousins, no doubt about it. Yeah, one leads into the other, and of course, there's certain things that are stressful for one person that doesn't impact another person at all. But the issue is with stress is what you perceive to be stressful. If you perceive something to be stressful, it is for you. It may not bother another person. There's some people and they work with finances. It's just like, oh, this money stuff is just going to drive me crazy. And I don't like doing this. Another person sits down, just kind of does it, and says, okay, well, what's next? And so. Right. So what's stressful to one person isn't necessarily stressful for another. But the good news in all this and talking about stress is that we all can choose to control the stress in our life. And I think that's the skill level that all of us have to kind of work toward. A lot of times we just kind of start thinking about stress. Well, I'm stressed out, and that's just the way it is. That's the way I am. And people don't realize that. Well, you can manage stress. Everybody can learn the skill of responding to stress in a different way.
Right.
So no matter if you're watching today and you're thinking about the stress, and maybe that you felt like you've been carrying stress for a long time. The good news is that you can learn how to manage it in a new way, and you can live without this monkey on your back, and experience freedom. So, and that's the norm, by the way. Sometimes you just have to go back and remember how God wants us to live. I guarantee you, God doesn't want any of us to live stressed out.
Right.
So anyway, for the next few weeks, that's what we're going to be talking about. And So to start out today, we're going to be doing a little study just to kind of kick us off on this topic. We're going to be looking in the book of Philippians in chapter 1. And this is the Apostle Paul. And the interesting thing that as Paul is writing the book of Philippians is that he's in a situation where you would kind of expect that he'd be kind of stressed out.
Yeah.
I mean, he's in house prison. In the passage that we're looking at, Paul, for 4 years, is living in rather miserable conditions. He spent 2 years in Caesarea on a trumped-up charge. He was accused of doing something that he didn't do, and so they just threw him into prison because they didn't know what to do with him. And they left him in Caesarea for 2 years, and then finally, after languishing there for so long, he said, well, I'm going to appeal to Caesar. And he was able to do that because he was a Roman citizen. The Roman citizens had the right to take their court before Caesar and let Caesar hear the facts of the case, and whatever Caesar decided, that was it. But and so when Paul appeals to Caesar, the Caesar, that's a title, that's not a name. Some people think, well, Caesar is like Julius Caesar. That was a person.
Right. But
the name Caesar was more of a title than it was. The Caesar at that point was Nero. So whenever Paul says, I want to appeal to Caesar, I want to go see Nero.
You got to be desperate.
Yeah, it's a pretty desperate situation. So he gets on a ship to go to Rome, and on the way, he is shipwrecked, nearly loses his life, barely gets to an island, out of the storm, and upon arriving on shore, he's bitten by a poisonous snake, and he has to wait there for the rest of the winter. And after that, he goes on to Rome, and he spends another 2 years in a house prison. And what that looked like during that 2 year period is that he's literally chained to a guard every 24 hours a day. And every 4 hours, a new guard would come in. They'd take the chain off the old guard and put it on the new one. And so there's absolutely no privacy of any kind whatsoever while he's awaiting an opportunity to have his case heard. So, yet in spite of all these circumstances that he's going through, he talks about the stress that's in his life in this passage that we're looking at. So let's read it, and then we'll spend a few moments talking about it. Starting in chapter 1 of Philippians, verse 12, he says, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I'm put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. Yes, and I will rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance, and as it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not at all be ashamed, but that with full courage now as always, Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or by death. So, the stress, sometimes when the Bible is talking about a particular topic, the word itself, the word stress, doesn't appear in these verses, but you still, you feel the stress when you're reading it, I mean, when you know the background and you know what this guy's going through, and you would not be surprised if this guy was not stressed out, filled with anxiety.
But he's handling it much better than I would, for sure.
Well, he's handling it pretty good. And I think if we look closely at the passage, we'll see some of the principles that come out of it that we could kind of, apply to our life. The verse 12, it says, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. Now, when I read that verse, I kind of thought, well, that's amazing.
Right.
Because, when you get a letter from a guy in prison who's been falsely accused, languishing in prison for 4 years, shipwrecked, bitten by a snake, all this stuff that he's gone through, you would expect, I need some help.
Right.
Somebody come to my rescue. And yet, what Paul does is he stops himself from this repetitive negative cycle that we often get caught in whenever things are going wrong in our life. He chooses to manage the way that he evaluates his life. I mean, bad stuff happens to all of us. A lot of bad stuff happening to people today.
Right.
He went through bad stuff, and a lot of us go through really bad stuff. And to a large degree, we can't change that, There's just a lot of things that come our way in life that we just simply don't have any control over. But Paul chooses to think about what's going on in his life from a different perspective. Instead of commiserating and saying, let me tell you what happened. I had this going on, I had that going on, and then this happened, but Paul says, look, what's really been going on in my life has served to advance the gospel. In the middle of all the darkness, there was a pearl.
Well, when he claims that his brothers and sisters, are those his captors as well?
Well, when the Bible talks about brothers and sisters, they're really talking about believers.
Believers.
Yeah. So what ended up happening, because Paul was everywhere he went, he always witnessed. He was always sharing the gospel of Christ, and so they became brothers and sisters. They came and they were adopted into the family, so to speak.
So he is literally applying his situation to the acceptance of Christ to his brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
So he's seeing every bit of this as good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every time the guards are changed, and I don't know whether it's every 4 or every 6 hours, but they change the guard every 4 or 6 hours. New opportunity to win.
You can't get away.
Really, who was being punished? The guard?
Yeah, right.
Oh man, I got 6 hours of this?
Yeah.
Who was the prisoner at that time?
Yeah. Well, he literally starts this chain reaction.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, guards are getting saved, and we know from history, matter of fact, that several members, like one of Nero's wives and a daughter, got saved as a result of Paul's testimony. Mm-hmm. And we know that in history because Nero found out that they had converted to Christianity, and he had them put to death. Yeah. Nero was just this, horrible madman. But the gospel was growing, and so Paul looked at his situation, and instead of getting stressed out, he's got this sense of contentedness that someplace in the midst of this, God has a purpose, and that attitude that he had, I think that went a long way for him gaining an audience with other people. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, he must have had a reputation that was amazing.
Yeah, because if you got a person that is, everything's terrible about what I'm going to do, and they're crying and they're depressed and they're falling apart and they're accusational, because stressed out people normally do make accusations. Right. Well, who wants to listen to that person?
Right.
But if you got a person that is calm and has a positive attitude, well, I want to listen to what that person has to say. So it gained him the right to speak. What were you going to say?
I think you see the same principle lived out today in the lives of somebody who goes through something terrible. A terrible illness, a death in the family, whatever horrible, stressful event takes place. But you see him come out the other say, yeah, but I wouldn't take it away.
Yeah.
I've lived through it, as horrible as it was going through it. Seeing what God was doing in it allowed it to be okay. If we, instead of focusing on the bad event in my life, if instead I focus on what is God doing in my life while this event is going on, it changes our focus.
Yeah.
And rather than my event being the big, God is the big. And God is what I'm looking at, and that magnifies Him, and it makes it okay. It doesn't mean it's going to be pleasant. I don't think Paul enjoyed being imprisoned. It's shipwrecked, beat up, all the things that happened to him. I don't think any of that was fun, but he could look back on it and say, it's okay, it's not good.
Oh, wait a minute. Are you saying that the purpose of life is not fun?
If so, I've missed the purpose. We just... when we focus on what is God doing with this mess, it starts to give something that there can be no possible reason for this. There's no good in this. Why would God allow this to happen? And then, wait a minute. Oh, I see this. And we have somebody that we knew in common who passed away. We affectionately called Brother John. And, gosh, that made no sense. He was so young, taken so tragically. And yet, I know of a dozen different people that have come to the Lord because of his death.
Yeah.
It's okay. It was a horrible, horrible thing. But God used it to find good elsewhere.
Yeah. One of the when you read through this passage more, Paul begins talking about some of the guards. He says that there are some people who are sharing the preaching Christ out of envy and rivalry.
Right.
Now, what we think happened there that Paul's referring to is that there were some. When you start seeing some good things happen in another people's life, that Paul always was getting an audience with people. So people saw him preaching Christ, and so they said, well, I'll preach Christ, and people will listen to me, and so, but the interesting thing about Paul is that his ego never got in his way. He didn't care if people heard about Christ from me, or people heard about Christ from him, or as long as Christ was, who cares what their motive is, as long as Christ is being shared. Just the fact that somebody else, he didn't see that he was in competition with somebody. They should be listening to me. I'm the preacher here. I'm coming. And he wasn't concerned about that. And a lot of times, I think that's kind of what you're getting at too. A lot of times, it is our ego that feeds into the stress factor in our life. Because a lot of times the thought that we have whenever difficult times come our way is, I deserve better.
Well, I think that's why our stress levels are so much higher in our society. Because I think people are focused on themselves more than anything else now.
Yeah.
And so then, I deserve to have stress.
Yeah, well, you get what you purchase, I guess.
Right.
One way of looking at it.
Yeah.
We are individuals that are very concerned about our rights and focused on what I deserve and those kinds of things. And, in this world, we just don't always get what we deserve. We don't always have the right thing happen to us. And that may be fair, it may be unfair. The bottom line is, it's just the way this world is.
Right.
But Paul doesn't get caught up in that. It's a matter of, he avoided a lot of stress in his life by keeping his priorities straight. It was very difficult, painful. circumstances that he would never choose for himself, but his priority was to preach Christ. And so I can do that whenever I'm in prison. I can do that when I'm in a church. I can do that when I'm walking along the road. I can do that when I'm in my house. As long if I know what my priority is, and I can accomplish that, then what am I stressed out about? So he chooses to manage his perspective. He prioritizes his concern, and then a very interesting thing. He also says in verse 19, he says, "I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus, this will turn off my deliverance." And one of the things that comes up in the book of Philippians over and over is this topic of prayer. One of the ways that Paul responded to stress in his life was just a very simple act of prayer. He always went running to prayer. Every time he had a problem, every time he had a concern, he'd say, "Look, would you pray for me? Pray for me because I need it." And he always put prayer as the first resort, not the last resort. And prayer is, it's. I think for a lot of us, prayer is the very easiest thing that can possibly do. A 2-year-old child can pray, but it's also the most difficult thing to do at the same time. It's not a discipline for whatever reason. For a lot of us, that seems like it comes very easily. It's something that it just seems like we have to really work at it, or we have to prioritize our life and make it a discipline, or I don't know, maybe it's not that way for you guys.
No, I get stressed out about prayer.
You get stressed out about prayer?
You can stereotype a person that prays a certain way, and you start to question, am I praying right? Am I doing the right thing? Am I asking for the right stuff? And I think the Sermon Sunday helped out quite a bit in that, when you start to focus on the 3 things that you want to do. But yeah, I can see where people don't turn to prayer because they don't feel comfortable. They're not sure how to.
Yeah. I remember in school, we had this professor came up from Dallas Seminary, and he spoke for 3 days in the chapel. He was doing like this 3-day series, and all his prospective pastors were there. And his name was Howard Hendricks, by the way. Howard Hendricks, for those who know theological circles, in his day, world-renowned speaker. Just this really phenomenal pastor of pastors kind of guy. And so he's speaking 3 days on prayer. He spoke with passion, spoke with clarity. Very, very he's just very knowledgeable, So at the end of 3 days, he's going to have a question and answer time. And so he says, "Are there any questions?" And it wasn't me. Some other guy in the room raised his hand and said, "Dr. Hendricks," he said, "I've listened to you speak a lot on prayer, and it's all been very moving." He said, "But when did you ever develop a passion for prayer? Because to be honest with you, I get up in the morning, I don't feel like praying. And you're telling us that we should all get up in the morning, and the very first thing we should do is go to prayer, and I don't feel like praying when I get up in the morning." He says, "So when did it happen for you?" So Dr. Hendricks, he said, "Well, to tell you," he said, "son," he said, "to be honest with you," he said, when the alarm goes off at 5 o'clock in the morning, I don't feel like praying." He says, "I force my body out of bed. I go down, I get a cup of coffee, and I go into my office, and I open up my Bible, and I discipline myself to read the Bible. And to be honest with you, a lot of times, I just don't feel like I want to do it when I start. But what I've learned is this: by the time I get to the end of that time, I wouldn't have missed it for the world." So he said, to be honest with you, it's this practice of prayer in my life started out more as a discipline than anything else. And then over time, I'm not always resistant to get up now, but it's still something of a discipline. And I think that that's just part and parcel of being a Christian,
So people that get stressed out, they drive erratically, road rage, right? They argue and they fight, And but if they understood or knew how and felt comfortable with prayer, it would be like a pressure valve.
Yeah, I think prayer. I think what happens in prayer is it's the place where we exchange burdens. We come into the throne room of grace carrying our burden, but when in prayer we leave it there. We set it down before the throne, and we say, Lord, I can't deal with this. And I got to give it to you. You have your way in it. You accomplish your will. And then we walk away. And I think that there's this supernatural thing that happens in prayer. And I think for those of us who pray, I think that all of us would say, I don't exactly understand how it happens, but I know that it does happen. There's something in the middle there where I can't really explain it, but it's real.
Well, would it not be the same release emotionally as blowing your lid and getting it off your chest? In reality, you're doing it through prayer with a relationship rather than just blowing your lid.
Well, yeah. The problem with the latter, though, is that at least my experience with anger and expressing anger is that once we manufacture it, we want to manufacture
Go back to it again.
Yeah.
Well, we need to go back to prayer again and again.
Well, yeah. One leaves you with a sense of contentment. The other leaves you with feelings where you're all messed up, and everybody around you is all messed up.
I can't wait till I'm stressed so I can do this again.
Yeah.
But it seems like that would be the answer for a person that feels that kind of stress. Is how do you get rid of it?
Yeah, so that's what we're going to be talking about for several weeks. Stress it's a multifaceted kind of a deal. It comes into our life because of external pressure that we're feeling, and we don't know how to respond to it. Everybody knows what that is. You got some kind of situation coming your way, and you don't feel equipped or prepared, or you can't imagine how you're going to respond to it. So that's external. Then there's internal pressure that we feel that causes stress. And this is, I think it's because we don't regulate the internal dialogue that all of us have going on inside of our minds. We tend to overthink, and we tend to think the same things over and over and over. And every time we think something that, feels uncomfortable to us, it gets a little larger, and a little larger, and a little larger. And and so there's this internal pressure that just keeps on building up inside of us, and we don't know what do we do with that, and a lot of people don't know what to do with that. If you don't learn how to deal with that internal dialogue, those internal emotions. Now, when I say dialogue inside, I'm really talking about emotions, because the emotions are thoughts. A sad person feels sad because they're thinking sad thoughts.
Right.
An angry person feels angry because they're thinking angry thoughts. So emotions are tied very, very specifically to our thought life. And if we don't learn how to regulate that, you mentioned earlier of depression, this is where it goes.
Right.
Because people don't learn to think about properly what they're thinking about. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I do. It sounds like a Yogi Berra thing.
Yeah, it does. But you got to think about what you're thinking about.
Right.
Because if you don't think about what you're thinking about, you're just going to be a broken record on the inside. And then if you don't manage your thoughts, they're going to manage you. You don't control your emotions, their emotions are going to control you. And so a lot of people will say, well, I can't help how I feel. It's how I feel. Well, yes, you can. Who told you that you can't help how you feel?
Right.
Why do you think that? Where did you get that piece of wisdom?
Like a very immature response.
Yeah.
Like a child would say.
Exactly. Yes. And a child doesn't have the ability, because they haven't
matured enough to get
They
it.
Right.
haven't learned it. They haven't been taught it.
Right.
They haven't experienced it enough.
Yeah. So if people can begin to learn how to regulate their thought life, this internal pressure that just continues to build and build and build, you know, you can pop that safety valve anytime you want to, you know,
Yeah.
and decompress, but a lot of people don't. I heard a story. I was listening to a newscast this morning and about a guy that, you know, took his life, and very bright, was going through Harvard Law, had a lot of very positive, you know, things, and very, you know, wonderful future, but got stuck in depression, and it wasn't a matter of intellect. See, I mean, he's in Harvard, so he's got to be a smart cookie,
Right.
you know. But here's a skill that if somebody would have taught him earlier in life. Now, it's not the only part of depression. Depression is a very, very, very deep, complicated topic, but this will go a long way to helping people dealing with, you know, stress and depression and those kinds of things in their life. Yeah.
So is it the internal that is probably the most dangerous? Because the external, it seems like you can see it, you can express it, you can get away from it.
I guess in one way or another, it's always going to come down to the internal. We can't live in this life and not face external pressure.
Yeah.
You know, so it's, you know, if we learn to think different, like Paul learned how to think differently about his circumstances, so, you know, he was able to, you know, kind of live without this burden.
The external, being in prison,
Yeah, he still
didn't
had it.
overwhelm him at all.
Still had it, but you know what? And interesting, in the book of Philippians, the theme that most guys would talk about when they come to this book to teach on it is joy.
Yeah.
You know, it's a topic that comes up over and over and over. And here's a guy sitting in prison teaching us how to be joyful. You know, so it's how you respond to your circumstances that really makes the difference. So, how does Scripture use to deal with stress? Well, we can see and react to the pressures in life the same way that the world does, or we can learn how to act in a different way. Stress can actually help grow us. There's another passage in 2 Corinthians 4 where Paul says this, and this is him talking about his life, what he's gone through. He says, "We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body." So Paul was a realist. You know, he said, you know, I got all kinds of problems, got all kinds of stress, and pressed on every side, but I'm not crushed. You know, there's times in which I'm perplexed. I don't understand what's going on. You know, why is this happening?
No idea what you're doing here.
Yeah, right. A lot of times I don't know what God's doing. You know, I mean, who of us hasn't faced that? But we're not in despair. You know, so you see that's the issue here. It's either going to be stress or it's going to be distress. All right? And we're not going to escape the stress, but none of us have to experience distress. Okay? And so distress is a word that's used more than 100 times in the Bible to talk about situations where people haven't learned how to respond properly to the stress in their life. And so there's this pressure, there's these bad circumstances, there's this stuff that's coming their way. And because, you don't thinking about it, you haven't programmed your mind to think God's way yet, that stress turns into distress. And once you get into a position where things are distressing, it really gets bad. You can sink into a pit and not be able to get out of it. And I've been there. All of us have at one time or another. So, what are the spiritual implications of stress? Stress is ultimately a spiritual issue that affects your whole life. It's not, pressure is not the issue. Stress is not the issue. Pressure is not the perpetrator. It's our inability to manage stress from a biblical point of view. It's our reaction that reveals whether we really know God's ways or not. One of the things that Paul says in the book of Philippians, he says, I've learned the secret of being content. You know, I can be in need, I can in times of plenty, times of need. He said, I go through all the stuff you do. You know? Yeah, and he did. Probably 10 times worse.
More,
yeah. But he says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. You know? There is a way to respond that God will bless, you know, whenever pressure comes our way. So I divided it here into two different responses. There's a mental response, and this is how we think about or interpret our events. You know, if you're worried that you're going to lose your job, you're going to talk yourself into it sooner or later. you know, I mean, you're gonna kind of create the circumstances of what you're worried about, and it's going to be self-fulfilling. But if you dwell on God's faithfulness in the midst of the problems that you got, you're supernaturally going to experience His peace.
Right.
You know, so in Philippians 4:8-9, you know, it gives us if anything is excellent, if anything is praiseworthy, if anything is noble, it kind of goes through this long list, and then at the end of it, he says, think about these things. You know, think about what you're thinking about. Choose to think about what you're thinking about. So have you ever had a situation where you kind of wake up in the middle of the night and and you're legitimately sleepy, but then your mind starts to work, and you know, all of a sudden you're thinking about this problem.
It happened last night.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I literally was so stressed out about what I was thinking about, and I had to change my thoughts to try to go back to sleep. I had to literally start trying to think of something else.
Yeah, you have to be intentional about it.
Yeah.
You know? So in those kinds of moments, distraction can be a very, very good thing. And for me, a lot of times it's reading. You know, I'll open up a book, or I'll turn my computer on and I'll just start reading something.
To get away from that thought.
Yeah, so you know, now I'm focusing on something else very specifically. And so it's a principle of displacement. You know, you just have to get one thing out. I'm not able to, I don't know, maybe you guys can do this, but I can't. You know, just to say, well, I'm not going to think about that anymore. You know, I don't know if that works for you. It doesn't.
I like that light switch installed.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I'm not going to think about it.
I changed the station.
Yeah. I wish we could.
I changed the station in my mind.
Well, that we can do. Yeah.
Because that does that's exactly what happened last night. And I was thinking, you know, for some reason I woke up in the middle of the night and I thought, what if there's a fire at my daughter's house, and my grandson has created a whole room in the attic, and it's all fixed and it's beautiful up there, and I'm thinking, how does he get out?
Mm-hmm.
And now my mind is at 3 o'clock this morning just running through, I know I got to make escape ladder, but we haven't gone through how to use it yet, and now the fire's real in my mind.
Right.
And I literally had to say, okay, stop thinking of that, because that is something you could address tomorrow and you go teach them. Now get on to something else.
Stress will always take you down a rabbit hole.
Yeah. It was getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
I find one of the best, and I know it sounds simple and foolish at the same time, but one of the best things I can do for myself to deal with stress is do something about it. Okay, rather than sit around stressed that I'm going to lose my job or I've lost my job, all right, get out the paper, you start looking for, move on. Okay, yeah, it sucked, it's over with. I got things to do now.
Yeah.
Or I used to stress out over finances. And gosh, I don't want to sit down and pay those bills. I don't have enough money, and I'd keep putting it off. And then of course you get all the late fees, and I don't want to deal with this. I don't have enough money for the original. I'm not going to have enough money for. Then when I just stopped, sat down, made out my bills. Oh, that isn't so bad. Oh, okay, I can handle that and catch that. Yeah, all right. Now that I've dealt with it, it's no longer stressful.
Yeah.
Just doing something sometimes, I think.
I find our generation, I'll put us together.
That's all right. Yeah.
That we stress out more when we worry about other people than ourselves.
Yeah. So I think that's true now. Yeah.
And so when it's ourselves, what's the worst thing that can happen to me being a born again Christian?
Yeah.
I go to heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah. We stress ourselves out, worried more about how to take care of other issues outside of us.
Yeah. So the principle of displacement, and then I go back again to the principle of prayer. I don't know if I told this illustration to you guys. I had my first church. We had a very, very large physical plant. It was a building that had been built into a building, and that building had been built onto on the other side. And so there's a third of a city block kind of a thing. It was sprawling, huge, 5 oil furnaces.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was just this gigantic building, and I hated when the oil guy pulled on the parking lot. I thought, not again! It's like he's there all the time. Give him an office. And
hook up directly to the
put a pipeline on there. So I mean, it was an inner city church, and we didn't have that much, and so I got this phone call from the oil guy, and he said, "Pastor," he said, "listen," he said, "I don't know if you've seen your oil bill, but you guys got to pay the oil bill." And so I said, "Well, we're going to take care of it," but then I know what the condition of the finances in the church, and it doesn't look pretty. We're trying to keep a school running and pay the staff and all this stuff, and I'm stressed about it. I mean, all weekend I'm stressed, and I'm sweating, and I don't know what to do with this. So I come in on Monday morning, and get the doors open up and the lights on, and all the kids are coming in, and people coming in, that kind of stuff, and I'm sitting in my office, and I'm still stressing, man. I'm sitting down, and I'm having a little devotion, and it just kind of dawns on me. I'm thinking, why am I stressed out by this? And I prayed this. I literally said this prayer to God. I said, Lord, I'm all stressed out about this oil bill, but I just realized something. It's not my bill. It's yours. This is your church. And, so you got to pay your oil bill. And so now the funny thing had happened. Literally. I mean, I tell these stories, people laugh at it, but within 5 minutes, knock on my office door, there's this guy there. And a guy was bringing his grandchildren to school. And he said, "Listen, Pastor, I appreciate everything you're doing for the kids and that stuff." And he said, "I recently came into some money and just thought I'd give your church a little donation." Said, just something to help you out a little bit. Hope you can use it. Pay your electric bill or whatever. So I opened up the envelope, and he gave me $1,000. Now, that wasn't enough to pay the oil bill. But I heard what the Lord was saying.
I did my part.
Yeah. The rest is yours. But it was just this unique lesson, where when you give it to the Lord, and you know what, I still had the rest of the pay and all this kind of stuff, but you know what, I wasn't stressed about it, but because He does meet our needs, and He is our burden lifter, and He enjoys the times whenever He can remove the stress from our life. I think that God I think He giggles when we get to the point of understanding that if we trust Him enough, he'll take care of us.
Well, isn't that how you feel? I know that's how I feel if I do something for someone else to bring them joy or to help relieve an issue they're in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what a joy it is to help people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it helps our mental side of life. It certainly helps the emotional side of our life, and you mentioned this earlier, the physical side as well. I mean, when we begin just focusing on our difficulties, and we get tired, we get slow, we get sick, and I mean, we get dark.
Yeah.
We isolate. And you mentioned addiction, we begin to self-medicate, and it just takes us down this negative spiral where nothing good happens. Our nervous system responds to it, our whole physiological system really just begins to fall apart.
Your gut.
Yeah.
Heart pressure, blood pressure goes up.
Yeah.
It's just, it's probably the largest indicator of not being well physically.
Yeah.
Is the stress level that continues.
Yeah. I think that to a large degree, that a lot of the diseases that we suffer with in life are in one way or another tied to our misunderstanding how to respond to the stress in our life. This is a big topic, and really has a very, very great significance for all of us in our lives. So we're going to continue on with it in the next couple of weeks. We want to thank you all for being with us today, and it is a joy to be able. We get to come here and kind of hang all our laundry out in the lawn.
I'll tell you about my 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, right. If nothing else, if it's not helping anybody, it's therapeutic for us. Okay? It's helping us. So.
Join us.
Well, you know that they're sitting there relating to their own stories.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
We all live the same
Right.
in one way or the other. But it's been a privilege and a blessing to be with you. If we can help you in any way, please don't hesitate to contact us. We want to be a blessing to you, and anything that you would allow us to be a part of, we'd count it a privilege and a blessing. So let's have a word of prayer before we end tonight. Heavenly Father, thank you so much, and I want to pray, Father, for that person that might be sitting here tonight, Lord, and just listening and feeling stressed out as they were flipping through the channels, Lord. They just happened upon this little talk about stress in their life. I want to pray, Father, that you would be for that person a burden lifter. Bless your sons and daughters, and those who are not near to you. We pray, Father, that you would draw them near, fill them with your love and your grace and mercy and your strength, Lord God. Strengthen that person, Father, who has been feeling as if they've been walking in darkness and has been struggling with depression, Lord. I want to pray you'd lift them up and displace that sense, that spirit of depression with a spirit of joy. Do that for your glory in their life, Father. Bring freedom and real joy into their life. And I know that you will do that, Father, as they cry out to you. And I want to thank you for that. With eyes of faith, I see you doing it now. In the blessed and the wonderful name of Jesus, we pray these things. Amen and amen.